So friends, let's do something a little different today. I recently sat down with my friend John Fugelsang, comedian and biblical scholar. I know those two things don't really feel like they go together, but just wait. John is also now the author of the New York Times bestseller, Separation of Church and Hate, a sane person's guide to taking back the Bible from fundamentalists, fascists, and flock-fleecing frauds. So friends, I hope you enjoy this interview with my friend, John Fugelsang. Friends, welcome to another edition of Justice Matters One-on-One. Maybe we should call this the lighter side because this is a very heavy topic, but it is so infused with humor that I think you're really going to enjoy it. I have with me my friend John Fugelsang, and I do mean my friend. I'm going to take a little bit of the interviewer's liberty here to talk about John in a short introduction. I got to know him in recent years when somehow I had the good fortune of being invited to be part of Stephanie Miller's Sexy Liberal Tour. To be clear, I'm the liberal part. John is obviously the sexy part.
No, I'm the tour part. Stephanie and Miller are the sexy part. Yeah.
And so somehow I ended up joining the crew and going from city to city, joining them on stage after a whole bunch of great comedians appear. And this is all kind of a democracy-centric comedy show. And then they invite me up. Sometimes I'm joined by guys like Rob Reiner or Adam Schiff or Jamie Raskin, and I do a little bit of a rule of law rap. We talk about the legal issues of the day and the state of the rule of law under Donald Trump and company. So it's been my incredible good fortune to not only get to know John personally, but to be able to stand backstage off in the wings and watch him perform many times over. And that's why I was so excited to read the book, because although it's a pretty weighty topic, the title of it, not to bury the lead, is Separation of Church and Hate, a sane person's guide to taking back the Bible from fundamentalists, fascists, and flock-fleecing frauds. Say that 3 times fast, but I love the alliteration. But it is so infused with not only incredible observations, so much of it, I didn't know, even though I kind of was raised in the Protestant church. I learned so much, and I laughed on damn near every page. And what I told John is my only beef is that I'm in the habit of underlining and dog-earing each time I find something notable, and damn near every page is underlined and dog-eared. So I have a complaint about that part, John. But listen, I'm going to read very briefly because I can't do any better introducing John than what is on
intro.
What is on the dust cover.
Yeah, let's do more of this. I'm liking the intro.
I'm an officer of the court. I'm a lawyer. I could say all this under oath and it would be true. So here is what John's book jacket says. John Fugelsang has been murdered on CSI, picketed by the Westborough Baptist Church. He's a Drama League nominated actor, comedian, and broadcaster who's hosted many TV shows and podcasts, including the acclaimed Tell Me Everything series on SiriusXM Progress. He got George Harrison to give his final performance on VH1. That's got to be a story. He debated Jerry Falwell Sr. and David Duke. He has made countless appearances across all cable news networks, and his epic PBS road trip film on the American dream called Dream On, directed by Roger Weisberg, was named Best Documentary at the New York City Independent Film Festival. Please welcome my friend, John Fugelsang.
I can't believe Coyote Ugly's not in that bio. My God, what have my publishers done to me?
Did you dance
Hello.
bar in Coyote Ugly? Did you?
No, I shot for 1 day in that movie, and it's me and this impossibly pretty Australian guy. He's trying to book his girlfriend in my club, and I take his prized Spider-Man comic. I had no idea there were any women in that movie. 6 months later, I see a poster with all these gorgeous women, and I'm like, wait, that's the thing I'm in? Good God. I'm with the pretty Australian. And that interview was very kind, Mr. Kirshner. That's got to be unprofessionally familiar. I mean, we're like the Cuomo brothers at this point, pretending to do an interview after that.
I ask and I tell. Some people don't ask, don't tell. I ask and tell. So John, first of all, tell the people a little bit about your background before we launch into what made you decide to take on a topic like separating church and hate.
Sure. I mean, it's not every day that a comedian decides to write a book for believers and atheists about how to handle religious fundamentalists and Christian nationalists. I come from a curiously religious background. Some of your listeners may know, Mr. Kirshner, my mom was a nun from the Deep South. My mother joined the convent out of high school and worked as a nurse. She was stationed in Malawi, Africa to work with lepers. My dad is from Brooklyn, like yourself, and he joined the Franciscan Order of Brothers right out of high school. He became a teacher and was a Franciscan brother, and he wore the Jedi robes with the rope belt. And my dad fell madly in love with this quiet Southern nun he met at Holy Family Hospital in Brooklyn. They stationed her there before sending her to Africa. He knew he could never confess his love, so he became her pen pal and sent her very detailed, innocent letters about what was going on back in the States with Vietnam and Nixon and civil rights. Eventually, my mother left the convent, and after 10 years of hiding his feelings, my mother left Africa, and after 10 years of hiding his feelings, my dad confessed to her how he felt and got her to leave and go on a date. They tried to raise us to be progressive, free-thinking Catholics, which is why I do stand-up comedy, because I'll never afford the therapy I actually require. And, years ago, I was doing big network TV shows that, and that really didn't feel like what I wanted to do, but made a lot of money and made my agents happy. And I began doing stand-up about what the Bible actually said versus what some of the more right-wing politicians pretend it said. As I got further away from the Catholic Church, I got deeper into theology and studying the actual teachings of Jesus compared to what the right-wing religions of America fight for. And by right-wing religions of America, I mean the kind of Christians who get on TV. Because I grew up with a steady diet in the 80s and 90s of blow-dried televangelists and ex-segregationists like Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell. I never saw liberal or moderate or progressive Christians on my TV growing up. It reached a point, Glenn, over the years, I had many agents tell me don't do material about this, but everywhere I went and performed, I'd have so many people who said they were raised Christian and thought it was about love and thought it was about kindness and helping the less fortunate and lifting up the marginalized. And somewhere along the line, it became all about a mean little tax-free clique that persecuted gay people and migrants and tried to put women in jail for abortion, even though the Bible's never against abortion, and Jesus never mentions it, and abortions are legal and free in Israel right now because Judaism never bans it. We've had the wool pulled over our eyes on what Christianity is, and there's a very broad gulf between what Christ's very loud public fan clubs claim he fought for and his actual teachings. And so I wrote a book about how to debate these people using the scripture without having to get hateful and without having to resort to violence. I think humor can be enough. You can make them argue with Jesus and God. You don't need to argue with them yourself. Though if you know a few things in the Bible, you can actually engage the Christian nationalist in your life and say, well, God says to welcome the stranger, so does Jesus. Why should I listen to you and Donald Trump and reject God?
I want to start with some of your observations about Jesus in the book. So of Jesus, you say, and you kind of sum things up by saying, unbelievable atrocities and countless charities have been done in his name. His church was founded by radical revolutionaries and devolved into conservative bureaucracy. Let me quote you one more time and then ask you to talk a little bit about that de-evolution that you discuss in the book. You say, Jesus disdained wealth and earthly power and challenged traditional laws of his own faith. He rejected earthly materialism, renounced the idea of revenge, and commanded us to welcome the stranger. I know, right? Just like Donald Trump. What are the misconceptions and the misperceptions about Jesus and what he really stood for and what that has devolved into?
Well, the nice thing about this is you don't need to believe in any of the Bible as absolute literal fact to cite it when debating the Christian nationalist in your family or your workplace or your social media feed. The character of Jesus in the Bible was a peaceful, radical, nonviolent revolutionary, never spoke English, wasn't an American citizen. He was anti-wealth, anti-public prayer, Matthew 6:5, don't trust people who are praying in public to be seen, completely anti-death penalty, but never once anti-gay, never once mentioned abortion, never called poor people lazy, never fought for taxes for the tax cuts for the wealthiest Nazarenes, never asked a leper for a copay. He was a long-haired, brown-skinned, homeless, community organizing, anti-slut shaming, unarmed, Palestinian liberal Jew, if you believe what's actually in the Bible. And the problem we have is that for a very long time, I would say, since the Roman Empire took over and turned this movement of peace and empathy into an imperial religion of conquest and power, the problem is that what passes for Christianity often has nothing to do with the actual words of Christ. And the problem here is that what we've got is a very well-organized, well-funded, profoundly white, and deeply right-wing movement in this country that has existed for centuries, that is trying continually to violate our Constitution and force a very narrow right-wing version of Christianity onto our culture, our governance, our airwaves, every semblance of public life. Your listeners should Google the Seven Mountain Mandate. This has always been the goal of Christian nationalism. This is what Mike Johnson is all about. Now, if they're going to try and force their version of Christianity on the rest of our country, we're allowed to see if they actually follow Christianity. If they're going to stand in our house and claim that they speak for Jesus, we're allowed to quote Jesus to see if they really mean it, because Jesus is pretty clear about what his values are. And Glenn, in Matthew 25, the parable of the goats and the sheep, also known as the judgment of nations, it's very famous. It's where Jesus says, I was a stranger and you took me in. I was hungry and you fed me. I was in prison and you visited me. When did you do this, Lord? When you didn't do it for the least of these, you didn't do it for me. Very famous. But in that piece, Jesus lays out his main criteria for individuals and nations to go to heaven or go to hell. It's like his memo to the Heritage Foundation. Jesus says you're going to be judged by how you take care of the sick, how you take care of the poor, how you, welcome the stranger, and how kind you are to people in prison. And that's it. Nothing about how much money you give your church, how much you scream at women outside health clinics, how mean you are to that trans kid. Jesus lays his criteria out. Now, you find me a right-wing Christian politician trying to put that quote on a courthouse wall or a schoolhouse wall. They're trying to control every level of our culture and undermine the Bill of Rights because they think that they speak for God. And the reality is, not only do they not speak for God, they're opposed to Jesus on pretty much every issue that divides us as a culture. Jesus is not their savior. He is their mascot. And even if you're an atheist, if you find yourself debating a Christian nationalist on most of the issues that divide us, from abortion rights to healthcare, social safety nets, gun safety, feminism, LGBTQ equality, if you're debating one of these guys, Jesus is on your side, whether you believe in him or he's literal or not. And I just got so tired of seeing my parents' religion of love used as a cloaking device. I mean, the Iraq War should have closed the book on this for good. I mean, the Iraq War should have shown us once and for all, no, this right-wing Christianity doesn't follow Jesus. But Donald Trump is just the brazen junk-wagging opposite of everything this brown-skinned Nazarene ever talked about. The media is afraid to touch it. It's the third rail. I've worked in the media for 30 years. I know they're terrified. The Democratic Party, there's a few. There's Tallarico, there's Buttigieg, there's Reverend Warnock, but most Democrats have seemingly ceded spirituality over to the right as they've seemingly ceded the flag and patriotism. And everywhere I go, Glenn, I meet people who are raised religious, consider themselves spiritual, and they're just sick of it.
So, John, then how did the teachings of Jesus become so contorted? And I have a feeling the answer lies in the chapter that you title Paul, Jesus's PR man, who is not Jesus. So I learned so much from this chapter, but talk to our viewers a little bit about how, and let me quote you just for, I've got so many.
Please.
But you say everything that passes for homophobia and misogyny in the New Testament comes from Paul, not Jesus. For better or worse, he is the person most responsible for organized Christianity as we know it. Talk to us a little bit about how, what Paul says ain't the word of God.
Yeah, it really isn't. And it's a fascinating story. I never planned, Glenn, on writing a whole chapter about St. Paul. It was not interesting to me. But when I was trying to write a book about what Christianity started out as and what it turned into, I found out it's just impossible to not talk about Saul of Tarsus, who started out, as your listeners probably know, as he was a Pharisee. He was a Jewish religious boss, and he was also a Roman citizen, which gave him a lot of cultural advantages that Jesus's Jewish apostles didn't have, being that they weren't Pharisees. These were all working class guys, and they were in Judea under Roman occupation. But Paul could travel all around. And Paul was present for the stoning of St. Stephen, the first Christian martyr. He was really passionate as a Pharisee about hunting down the surviving Jesus movement people and murdering them for blasphemy, and he was really good at his job. They began sending him outside of Jerusalem to go persecute Christians elsewhere. The famous story is he's on the road to Damascus. He's blinded by a light. Jesus' voice appears and says, "Paul, why do you persecute me?" At least we think it's Jesus, Glenn. They never actually met in real life, and there were no recordings, so we don't know how Paul knew it was Jesus' voice, but this is the story we got. So he's blinded for a few days. Eventually he's healed. He becomes Paul because having a Gentile name was going to make it a lot easier to spread his message among the Gentiles. And so while all of Jesus's friends were being murdered by Paul's old buddies back home, he starts traveling around the Roman Empire spreading his version. And his version was, hey, it's like Judaism. You get all the salvation, but you can keep your foreskin and have bacon. And it winds up being insanely popular. And I mean, like the conversion rate's insane, 3 to 4% per decade. Eventually, Paul was killed by the Romans. He couldn't get away with it for long. Paul, of course, was not Jesus, and he poured all of his hang-ups into the work. He wrote letters to the early Christian community. That was his deal. Jesus was about teachings and ways to live. Paul was about hierarchies and church structure and how to build a community, and he deserves credit for it. I mean, for better or worse, it all came from this guy. And he would write a lot of letters about how to get the church going and what you should do. And those letters are how we know about Paul, right? So 300 years after he dies, the Roman Empire takes over Christianity. I mean, there's cultural appropriation, and then there's taken over the movement of the guy you killed. But now Christianity goes from being this little movement that's persecuted to being a giant imperial religion that can persecute pagans, persecute Jews, persecute Muslims, and boy, howdy, they did. But at the Council of Nicaea, where they decided which scriptures are going to be part of the official Bible, they added all of Paul's letters. So when Paul wrote a letter to his protege Timothy saying, look, all the Hebrew scriptures, everything in the Hebrew scriptures, it's all God-breathed. God's a part of all of it. Well, suddenly that began applying to Paul's letters themselves. When Paul said all scripture is God-breathed, he wasn't talking about the letter he was writing in the moment. But 300 years after his death, Paul's letters about Holy Scripture become Holy Scripture. It's like if Roger Ebert's review of The Godfather was suddenly declared officially part of The Godfather's script. So now all of Paul's hang-ups about gay men, all of Paul's hang-ups about women, that they should be silent, that they should not speak up and never have authority over a man, Jesus was into none of that. Jesus was the biggest feminist in the Bible. I will argue he was actually pro-gay, never said anything anti-gay. But now Christians can say, oh, it's in the Bible. There's the homophobia. Women be quiet. So that's how it began. And when the Romans took over and began the Crusades, it became a movement where instead of the nonviolence commanded by Jesus, they were committing violence in the name of Jesus to steal land and resources, and they rationalized it by saying, we're going to force people to convert to Jesus. And that was what justified the doctrine of discovery and what they did to the Indians and the slaves. We know that being saved didn't save them.
What an opportunity lost. If we only could have stuck with the teachings of Jesus. As I was reading the chapter on Paul, I actually wrote in the margins, people will not be able to make out legs. You can scratch. I wrote, I never knew Paul was such a son of a bitch.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful writer. A lot of beauty, like beautiful passages on love. He's quoted at every weddings. And again, in some letters, he's a misogynist. In other letters, he talks about women who are deacons and women who saved his life. So was he writing different messages to different churches? Were these letters being rewritten by different people over the centuries? The good news is it doesn't freaking matter because Paul's not Jesus. A lot of Christians, however, quote Paul way more than they'll ever quote Jesus because he satisfies their prejudices and hangups.
And here's how you conclude the chapter on how Paul is not Jesus. You say, Paul may have ensured the survival and expansion of Christianity beyond Palestine, but we must always remember that his work with Jesus's movement while building the religion would eventually lead directly to the Crusades, the Spanish Inquisition, colonization, manifest destiny, modern Christian nationalism, and the official autographed Donald Trump Bible. Here we are with the de-evolution again.
Yeah. But the important thing I try to get at in the book, and again, it's not really a history book. Most of the history was cut out. Throughout the book, I go through all the topics that divide us and the main talking points that right-wing folks will use about same-sex relationships or abortion or feminism. But the important thing is the history of Christianity is a history of authoritarian control and authoritarian cruelty, but it's also a history of Christ followers resisting it. Christians gave us the Crusades, but Christ followers like St. Francis quit the war and renounced violence. Christians gave us doctrine of discovery and Columbus slaughtering Taino people in the shadow of the cross, but Christ followers fought back. Bartolomeo de las Casas, the priest on Columbus's boat, one of the first ever instances of a protest by a white person in this hemisphere, was against Columbus's treatment of the indigenous people. Christians gave us slavery in America. Christ followers like Frederick Douglass and the Quakers and Harriet Tubman, they resisted. Christians gave us segregation. And Dr. King used scripture to shame white America out of American apartheid. This has been the whole history. There's an amazing history of Christian activism, but it has always manifested itself in resistance to Christian authoritarianism, including the Holocaust as well.
So let me ask you this, because it's in the news presently. Where in the Bible do we find the rapture?
I'm glad you asked. You find the rapture in nowhere. The word does not appear in the Bible. And I had an entire chapter on the rapture, and we had to cut it for space, believe it or not. But it's a topic that fascinates me because
Cutting the rapture for space sounds a little, that's an interesting choice, right?
well, I thought feminism and LGBTQ issues were more important, but I mean, it doesn't appear anywhere in the Bible. The actual term rapture was coined by a British clergyman, John Darby, in the 1850s. Now, in the book of Revelation, there is an extended talk about the end of the world. It is written by someone who's probably not John the Apostle, but another John who is tripping his face off on shrooms in a cave and writing down his NyQuil hallucinations. It is very beautiful writing. It is not pro-violence. It is pro-resistance in a violent era. It's all metaphorical. It's got nothing to do with Jesus, although he shows up. It's the one part of the Bible where he's really described as looking black. His hair was like wool. His feet were of burned bronze. They don't quote that part too much, but Revelation is where you learn about the end times and from this entire rapture economy, because that's what it is, Glenn. It's a big money-making racket. From the Left Behind books to the late great Planet Earth back in the 70s, a lot of people have made a lot of money off a lot of gullible Christians who would rather believe in the most narcissistic of spiritual ways that they are on God's VIP list. I'm going behind God's golden velvet rope. When the rapture comes, I will ascend into the heavens, while the rest of you unworthy, lesser people are down here having 1,000 years of tribulation. It's incredibly spiritually narcissistic, especially because Jesus says, you shall not know the hour nor the day. Jesus says, you're not going to know when it's going to happen. But they don't care. People are addicted to it. I call them apocalyptics. And they want to live in the end of the world. Some of it because they believe that when the tribulations come, half the world's Jews will be violently killed, and the other half will be forcibly converted to Christianity. They really do love Israel that much. That's driving a lot of right-wing evangelical support for Israel, as I'm sure your listeners know too. But rapture, nowhere in the Bible. Jesus is not this violent guy with a sword. That's in John's hallucination. Right-wing guys like to quote that Jesus and believe in that Jesus, but it's not anything Jesus ever actually said. So it's a lot of crap. It's a big racket for gullible people, but don't feel bad, rapture people. It's not the end of the world.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't the latest rapture scheduled for like today or yesterday?
Yeah, it was today or yesterday.
So
Yeah,
it's been
yeah.
rescheduled, I guess.
Yeah, I was on the Daily Show last night. There was like a running gag the whole night about it. But again, like it just shows no faith. I mean, Jesus's whole movement is not about you're guaranteed a spot in heaven, and it's not about this prosperity gospel. Be good and God will reward you with stuff either. All that stuff is just blasphemous side hustles. Jesus says, you want to follow me, it's hard. You got to pick up your cross and follow me every day. Fighting for the marginalized, fighting for the people on the bottom that no one cares about, that's going to make you unpopular, man. This is Jesus's whole message. And again, you don't have to believe in him literally to recognize that his message and teachings are every bit as threatening to authoritarian power today as they were 2,000 years ago. And that a small number of far-right conservative Christian fundamentalists aligned with authoritarian government power, that's literally what killed Jesus.
Can we do a quick, maybe a lightning round of Stump the Religious Expert? Are you up for that?
Oh my, I'm hardly an expert. I'm just a clown with a weird childhood, but let's try it.
So I think I mentioned to you maybe before we started recording, I was raised in the Protestant church. So
Yes, sir.
I don't, I don't know, am I a recovering Protestant? I don't know if that's oxymoronic. I don't know if it's redundant or both. I don't know.
I don't know if labels actually matter. If there is a God, I think it's about your relationship between you and the commander in chief, and the name on your hat probably doesn't matter all that much.
Yeah. And I will, this is kind of a personal quick anecdote that I don't know that I've ever shared publicly, but my mom felt very strongly that she wanted me to be raised in the Protestant church. She believed she was a remarkable woman, didn't cuss, didn't drink, didn't smoke. And when I say she didn't cuss, if she got really furious, she would say, "I'm so mad I could just spit." And she thought that was profane.
My parents said spit too. Yeah,
Right.
we were
Right.
we were a crap damn hell house, but no harder than that.
Oh, but now my dad knew all the words and used them liberally and conservatively. But so I say I had a great balanced upbringing because I learned all the do's from my mom and all the don'ts from my dad. But so I went to church every Sunday, I went to Sunday school. I did all of that because my mom insisted, and I was pretty compliant, happy to please her. And so it's funny because I haven't probably been back to a church in well over 50 years now, in part because when I was about 12, 13, 14, I don't remember the exact year, and my mom is long gone, so I can't ask her. She actually said, this was important to me, and I wanted you to be exposed to it, but it is now your decision to make, entirely your decision, which was so gracious and so loving and so generous. And I said some version of, thank you. And it never really resonated with me, but I appreciate that I've learned about it. And so what I think is imprinted in the back of my head is the Greatest Hits album. So, and it will never leave me. If I'm watching NFL football and I see John's 3:16, I was, oh, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have, and if I hear somebody say the Lord, oh, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And you can't, it's the Greatest Hits. And here's the question. And I have always wanted to know this, but not enough to Google it. So you've got the two versions of the Lord's Prayer, right?
Oh yeah.
One is debt and debtors, and one is trespass and trespassers, right? Forgive our debts as we forgive our debtors, or forgive our trespasses as we forgive those who've trespassed against us. John,
That's right.
please tell me, what is the difference? What is the origin? What is the import of those two different versions of the Lord's Prayer?
Well, let me begin by just referencing John 3:16 since you mentioned it, as I see it at sporting events all the time. Never forget, for God so loved the world.
Yeah.
Not for God so loved America.
Or conservatives, or the Republican Party.
Yeah, exactly. Or God so loved this one religion, or God so loved this ideology. I mean, God of the Bible does not really pay attention to the invisible lines in the ground we have invented to separate our tribes. And I'll talk about immigration more. In terms of this, it's a translation and an adaptation. I mean, there's so many different versions of the Bible. And, in many cases, it's the different translations from the Greek and the Hebrew and the Latin. In many cases, as I found trying to write a book about the Bible, Mr. Kirshner, a lot of different publishers just get a thesaurus and they decide to use the words that suit them better, which has caused all kinds of problems for people throughout the ages. Case in point, Exodus 21, God says when two men are fighting, if one of them somehow strikes a pregnant woman and the woman miscarries, then you got to pay a fine to the husband. This is God saying that a fetus is property, and that a woman's life, but if the woman dies, you have to pay with your life for life. If the woman dies, the man who hits her dies. If only the fetus dies, you pay a fine. So this is God saying a woman's life has more value in God's eye than a fetus, and that a fetus is property, right? But other editions of the Bible say if men strike a pregnant woman and her fruit go out of her, and many conservatives argue this just means that the baby's born prematurely. The fruit goes out of her. The baby's born prematurely. Now, I'm like, well, if that's the case, why are you paying a fine if it's a healthy preemie? I had to interview a rabbi to make sure I was getting the facts right. And the rabbi's like, yeah, go by the Torah. Don't go by the King James Bible. This is why there's abortions that are legal and free in Israel right now. But in America, you can get your edition that says her fruit goes out of her. And it seems like, oh, how nice. It was just a premature birth. So people will pick and choose the words in their published translations to suit their own biases. That's why very often it's really good to go back to the original Hebrew, go back to the original Greek. You know, the famous story of Jesus healing the Roman centurion's slave. Iconic story. You know, these guys are the occupying military army. Look at Jesus. He's healing the slave of the evil Romans. But in the original Greek, the word wasn't slave, it was pais, beloved boy.
Mm-hmm.
And what do we know about the Romans? They'd leave their wives at home when they went on the road, and they'd bring a boy with them for many purposes. If you were the one penetrating, there was no stigma attached. And we know this about the Roman Empire. And why would an occupying military general seek out some local mystic, homeless Jewish faith healer to come to his house to heal a common slave? So when Jesus, I'm sure the apostles were thrilled about this, but Jesus heals the male lover of an occupying Roman general, and we know that because of the word pais. But if you went by most 20th century translations, just says slave or servant. Is always more original when you dig into the translations.
Interesting. And I would venture a guess that the Republicans probably wouldn't be enamored of forgiving the debts of others, you know, but
And yet the Bible calls for a jubilee year every 50 years where all debts are repaid.
Mm-hmm.
They do not follow the Bible. They wave it over their head as a prop. They don't use it. They're here to fight for Jesus, but not to listen to him.
So speaking about not following the Bible, let's talk a little bit about immigration, because if ever, you know, we have seen welcome the stranger completely ignored, bastardized, contradicted.
No room at the end.
It's what's going on with immigration these days. So, you know, talk about that a little bit.
Thank you. First off, I'm not here to argue for open borders or amnesty. That was Ronald Reagan. He argued for both of those things using those exact words. But what gets me down is the criminalization of migrants, the need to call them illegals, which is a racist slur. I have never heard Fox News call a white lawbreaker an illegal before. But as Hitler knew with an undesirable minority 80 years ago, you've got to dehumanize them and make the Christians think they're not really people. So we call them illegals instead of calling them what we should call them, Christian refugees. I recommend calling undocumented folks Christian refugees because it really pisses off the right people. Now, God of the Old Testament commands the Hebrews to welcome the stranger. He don't ask nicely, and he even commands them to treat the alien as one of your own and to never cheat him, charge him interest. You can't even mistreat these immigrants, Glenn, once you welcome them. Jesus goes a step further, as I mentioned in Matthew 25, and says you're individuals and nations, heaven or hell, based on how you welcome the stranger. So this would seem pretty unambiguous if you've actually read the Bible. And that's why, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I was talking to our friend Scott Jennings on CNN a few weeks ago. And I said, God and Jesus both command us to welcome the stranger. Why should I listen to you and Donald Trump and reject God and Jesus? In many cases, if you're debating these folks in your local government, in your family, in your school, in your workplace, you don't need to fight them. Let them fight God. Let them fight Jesus. Jesus was against the death penalty. He stopped an execution and said only sinless people can execute. He overturns eye for an eye in Sermon on the Mount. Why was Jesus wrong and Donald Trump right? Just ask the questions. We don't need to fight.
Yeah. So let me ask you to look forward, John. What is your hope and what is your expectation about where things are headed? I mean, both on the religious front, but on the democracy front. Big question, I know.
I have tremendous faith in the incompetence of America's fascists of the 21st century. 20 years ago, we thought the republic was coming to an end over the lies and corruption of the Bush administration. We were hounded in the streets and called terrorist lovers and freedom haters because 100 million of us said this war was a bad idea and this country never attacked us. We forget how Donald Trump is so bad, he made everyone forget how dark and awful it was under Bush Cheney. But their incompetency and greed were so great, the entire thing collapsed, and they left office in complete ill repute. Donald Trump is going to be 10 times worse. Look, it's really bad he got reelected. It's really bad that after cops were beaten on the Capitol steps for a lie, that this was acceptable to this many white people. But this is where we find ourselves. And once again, take comfort in the fact that these guys are stupid and they are messy and they are greedy and they have no game. They can't stop screwing up. Donald Trump has missed so many easy layups. There's been so many chances he could have looked like the cool guy and made the liberals look silly, and he just can't not take the bait. The Kimmel case is the perfect example, Glenn. They could have gone behind the scenes and put the screws to Iger. They could have had Iger say, look, Jim, you're only 12% with the demo. We got to start cutting staff slowly. They're too stupid. They're too thirsty. This guy, Carr, has to go on Benny Johnson's zombie podcast and say the quiet part out loud, drop a quid pro quo. If it ain't government censorship, you know as well as me, Mr. Kirshner, it's clearly an abuse of power, coercing self-censorship from a private corporation. Look how Trump is losing the conservatives. And not just the conservatives who are already looking to put space there, like Tucker and Rogan and Ted Cruz, because they know this thing is going downhill. I mean, the Epstein files are not going away. Prices are going up. This was another Hail Mary pass to take down a comedian because they're too stupid to realize how bad that makes them look in the history books. I predicted on my show last week, Glenn, on SiriusXM, that Bob Iger doesn't want to have censorship in the first paragraph of his obituary. He's going to work all weekend with Nexstar and try and smooth this over. Sure enough, Kimmel came back last night, had a great monologue that I'm sure was gone through by 100 lawyers, and yet it was still the right thing to say. Donald Trump saved Jimmy Kimmel's show. That's how stupid they are. So again, as scary as it is, and they're going to hurt a lot of people, stop and smell the train wreck. Be sure to use ridicule and laugh, because we have to use nonviolence and comedy on these people. But also, just this is going to be a resistance of everything. I mean, all of the above, from Gavin Newsom figuring out the right kind of memes to Cory Booker having a filibuster to, you know, your grandma going and doing a protest march. I mean, it's going to be all hands for a year and a half. These midterms are going to be crazy. Donald Trump is relentlessly trying to get people to vote for Democrats. And I actually think it's not going to be that hard. I think he's going to have a much harder time stealing the midterms when you see the prices as high as they are and Epstein not going away. They wouldn't be trying to cheat in Texas 15 months early if they weren't scared.
I am so with you, John. I have been saying that the imbecility and incompetence of Donald Trump and the flunkies that he surrounds himself will cause this whole thing to implode. I don't know when, I don't know how, and I don't know how much damage he's going to be able to inflict before it implodes, but it will implode. I don't want to trail off into legal analysis, which is, you know, my
No, it's
my
true.
bailiwick. But you know, when I see reporting today that it looks like they're on the verge of criminally indicting Jim Comey, who committed no crime, I have been not so silently rooting for the first vindictive prosecution to.
Me too.
Donald
Me
Trump has
too.
been promising to lock people up for 10 years, starting with the OG of Donald Trump's wrath, Hillary Clinton, and he hasn't indicted anybody for so much as a parking ticket, which is smart, because then he can continue to lodge the threats. He continue
That's right.
and run investigations on.
His own DOJ exonerated Hillary Clinton in his first term, and none of his fans know that because the hate helps the movement.
And the minute this thing, if there's a vindictive prosecution against Comey or Tish James or somebody else, it's going to move into court, and federal judges will cram it down the throats of the DOJ lawyers who
That's
are
right.
unethical enough to bring it. What will that do? It will expose Donald Trump's threats to prosecute everybody as being absolute nonsense, hollow. He can't do it. And I think he's nothing but miscalculation, and he's going to keep playing against himself, and it's going to implode, you know. And I know
right.
that that's not comforting to people. They want something more concrete. And,
Well, we're going to see the last scene of Scarface in some way. It'll be the last scene of Scarface in some way.
yeah, say hello to my little orange friend.
I just think we keep looking to see when are these hardworking conservative folks going to dump this guy? When are these sucker non-millionaires going to stop being dupes for the oligarchs? I think we're looking at it the wrong way. I don't think we're got to look to see the hard work and middle class and working men dropping Trump. We got to watch the oligarchs dropping Trump. The reality is the men who own this country, the actual landlords who own this place, Donald Trump's never been one of them. He owns golf courses they golf at, but Donald Trump's the guy standing in front of their velvet rope saying, "No poors beyond this point." The people who own this country have already gotten their unholy tax cut. They've already seen the largest transfer of wealth from the 99% to the 1%, courtesy of these damn fools in this budget bill. They've got their unholy pollution license with the deregulation. They got their shitty crypto loophole. They don't need this guy anymore, right? They don't need the embarrassment. The oligarchs who own this country, they like having an undocumented workforce that can be exploited. They don't have a problem with abortion rights or gay marriage. They're just here to make money and own things. And so look at Rupert Murdoch. Look at how Murdoch is still playing nice with Trump on Fox, but the Wall Street Journal is done with this guy. When the Wall Street Journal reported about Epstein and Trump filed a $22 billion lawsuit, the next day, Murdoch is just brushing the dirt off his shoulder and releases the story. After the birthday card story, Trump sued them, and then Murdoch released the story the next day. Oh, by the way, Pam Bondi told him in May that he's in the files. I mean, Rupert Murdoch is putting this guy on notice in public, and I think we got to be watching in that way. What's going to happen when the billionaires decide this guy's not good for business, because these tariffs are not good for business.
Yeah, great point. So, John, first of all, where can they find the book? And I'm going to put a link in the description of this video. Where can they find the book, and where can they otherwise find you?
So grateful to you. Well, I'm on SiriusXM every night on the Progress channel. If you don't have SiriusXM, we're a free podcast, the John Fugelsang podcast that comes out the next day. I'm also all over the socials and on Substack. My book is called Separation of Church and Hate, A Sane Person's Guide to Taking Back the Bible from Fundamentalists, Fascists, and Flock-Fleecing Frauds from Simon & Schuster's Avid Reader Press. And you can buy that at your local bookstore or whatever non-evil website you like to buy books from.
And what I will say is Separation of Church and Hate will make you laugh. It will make you learn. I can't recommend it highly enough. And I only wish I had more time to quote you another 20 or 30 times. So, John, thank you for writing the book. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for everything you do to fight for democracy with humor, compassion, with love, with empathy. And I hope someday we get back on the road. I get to jump on stage again with you and the old crew, because that is like this gutter kid from Jersey's dream. Never thought it would come true, but I'm so grateful for it. So,
well, we're gonna have a good year next year. It's gonna be a very exciting year. And Glenn, you know what? I just wrote a whole book about Jesus, and what I see you doing all the time is fighting for justice. And you're not fighting for justice for the powerful. You're always fighting for the majority. You do fight for labor over management. You do fight for the accused over the authority figures. And what I see you doing is what my mother would call a real ministry. So thank you for what you do. And also because you talk me off a ledge all the time. I feel saner after I listen to your show. So thank you so much.
Thank you, John. And thanks again for being with us on Justice Matters One-on-One.
Peace.